And action. Tony had a question about farting. I'm going to call it gut health. Farting just sounds so rude. Anyway, if this is the first time you're finding me, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below and the alert button to find out when I put new videos out. So farting, let's just make it gut health instead. So gut health. If we have a healthy gut and a healthy digestive system, you're not going to fart as much. I think everybody will pass gas no matter what at one point in time or their life or not. Those of you who say you're not farting, you're lying. So this is just a side effect of the food we digest. We'll start with how this 27-foot tube works. It's from mouth to butt. That's a one tube that's connected, and there's different portions of the tube that do different functions. I've done a video on this before, but for this purpose, we'll start with the mouth. The mouth has to chew food and break down the solids, and the amylase, or the saliva in the mouth, will start the digestive process. So you're already taking a solid, turning it into a liquid. The stomach takes the majority of that solid that you just ate, or the milkshake you just drank, and churns it into very easily digested fluids. The stomach has acid in it, so when the food is chewed and then swallowed and passes through the esophagus into the stomach, it sits in that pouch with a whole bunch of acid for about 4 hours until that acid bath turns any food into very fine cells of mostly liquid. When the stomach senses that you have mostly liquid now, and only because you were having a very good fire, and fire meaning acid, in Ayurveda, the ancient healing tradition of India, fire or digestive strength is called Agni, because usually with youth you have energy, you have fire, you can digest anything, you're bulletproof. As you get older, it all goes away. But so if the stomach and the fire is working great, you digested everything, it's turned to liquid, and you can absorb it in the small intestine. That's all the small intestine does. It's of 27 feet, it's about 13 feet of very feather-like lining to the tubing, and the feather-like lining is where food gets absorbed. So this portion of the tube is supposed to absorb all the nutrients out of the liquidized or liquefied food that you just ate. And the thing that's really cool about the small intestine is it also has to be a barrier. It has to absorb, but it has to keep out things from being absorbed into the bloodstream, which is very ingenious. So the absorption part, we want fuel. We want macronutrients, we want fats, carbohydrates, proteins, healthy stuff, minerals to be absorbed so we can continue on the living process and rejuvenating process. But we want to keep stuff out like toxins, solid particles that are undigestible, bacteria, fungi, viruses, parasites. So usually in the small intestine, with the absorption there, you don't have that many bacteria. The bacteria are more in the large intestine, but the small intestine has a lining that's full of white blood cells to fight, and just in case something gets through, whether it's a foreign body like a gluten particle, a foreign body like a cow particle, like a milk particle, or a bacteria, parasite, or fungus. So that's where some people would say your immune system is built in the small intestine, and I think that does make sense because when your small intestine is irritated, sometimes your body on the outside, the skin layers, become irritated too. Stuffy nose, your immune system drops. So I think it has some credence. But for our purpose, if you have a good absorption system, cool. If you have a poor absorption system, or if the stomach didn't do its duty as far as liquefying solid food, the stomach will pass that hot potato of non-liquefied food to the small intestine. The small intestine will say, I can't handle this solid food. It's going to pass it on down to the large intestine. And here's where the farting comes in. Large intestine is supposed to hold the digested food until you're ready to dump it. But at the same time, it's a reservoir for a ton of bacteria. In fact, between the cells that make up your body, which are about 3 trillion, there are more cells and DNA in the large intestine, foreign DNA, than in your whole body. It's because we have this plethora of different bacteria called probiotic to make up the gut ecosystem. That's called microbiota. See my video, DrRic Tutorial Probiotic. This is one probiotic I'm taking right now. I change depending on the sale of the month, what I can find in the refrigerated section of the vitamin shops I go to, or Fruitful Yield or Whole Foods. And I try to vary it. Right now I'm taking Saccharomyces. But if you watch my other videos on probiotics, Saccharomyces, Acidophilus, Bifidobacter, and all their subspecies, they're all important. If you have a lot of foreign DNA, all healthy guys, in your gut, then you'll have good digestion. If you've been hit with an antibiotic for an upper respiratory tract infection, a urinary tract infection, or a sinus infection, or ear infection, then what happens is we kill all the bacteria up here, but you also kill off all these probiotics, which is not good. You screw up the ecosystem. Hopefully they'll rebuild. That's why I always tell anybody I have to give I don't like using antibiotics, but anybody I have to give an antibiotic to because you're high risk, well, you know you're always going to chase that with at least 60 days of probiotic. I don't take antibiotics. But I still do probiotics anyway because they also have benefits of weight loss and emotional stability. So if you took an antibiotic when you were younger or recently and you wiped out everything, then you are left with a whole bunch of really strong bacteria in the large intestine. And when those guys get a hold of undigested food, remember that's fuel. I told you it's supposed to be fuel for you, but if you have the hot potato thing where you pass on all the undigested food to the large intestine, that also is fuel to the bad guys that remain. And the bad guys that remain like to produce a lot of methane. Methane is fart. It's gas. And when you don't pass the methane, you get very crampy because that's expanding gas that's in the tube that's supposed to be narrow and tiny. Well, that expanding gas has got to go somewhere, so it's sent off with a fart. Sometimes, actually, the bacteria that are bad will also cause irritation to the lining of the colon. That's called colitis. And that's when you have diarrhea that's bloody. And it's not happy. Your whole system becomes screwed up and it's very painful. You can actually become anemic from all the colitis you have. And I have patients like that. So you can see how farting is dependent on all the tube lining before the large intestine. But it's not just that. If you do have a farting issue, then number one, you have to change around the way you digest food. You probably should change around the ecosystem in the large intestine, especially if you've been hit by antibiotics. And as far as choosing a probiotic, see my videos on DrRic Tutorial Probiotic 1 and 2. And then there's also another way to do this too. In the stomach, which starts the whole process, if you have difficulty with making enzyme, you can actually eat enzyme. So digestive enzymes also come in capsules. And if you can't make your own, then you try taking digestive enzymes for about a month before each meal. And that sometimes helps to break down the food particles or the solids in the food so that your stomach doesn't have to do the work and it's already liquefied by the time it gets to the small intestine. As far as which digestive enzymes, I have, this is Nature's Sunshine, very good company. It really depends on what you have available to you. And nowadays with Amazon you can get a lot, but what you want to do is make sure you don't have an ulcer, because if you have an ulcer and then you take a digestive enzyme, you'll actually digest your ulcer too, because the ulcer is a weakness in the stomach lining. If the stomach lining is intact and it has the mucus layers, it should be able to protect itself from its own acid. But again, that's another story. When people have reflux, they take Protonix, omeprazole, Prilosec, Nexium, and that stops all acid, which is not healthy in the long run because it stops digestion. You need acid to turn solid into liquid. If you're not making the acid, how are you expecting to turn that solid into liquid? It won't. And that's where you start this whole process. So it used to be, and it's very, only a small percentage of the population actually needs PPIs or those proton pump inhibitors. So if you're having to rely on those things long term, more than 4 weeks, you probably should change your diet. So even if you're used to all that stuff from before, you probably should change your diet, but that's why you have to see one of us. So if you have a farting issue, bottom line is, Tony, you might want to try a month of digestive enzyme, also eating healthy, and avoiding all the foods that caused GERD. And then if that doesn't work, then you might want to re-inhabit the ecosystem of the large intestine with probiotic. And as far as which one, that can be figured out later. But all this stuff can be found in texts. I like Dr. Mullen's book, Has even a nice section on different herbs to try or vitamins to try. Also has a section on food and food sources, spices, and it talks about gut health too, with different digestive problems. If you want to go old school, there's also, I mentioned Ayurveda, and this is an excellent book. It talks about the old school healing, and it breaks people down into 3 different types. They're called doshas, and depending on your dominant dosha, it'll tell you the food types that you should probably avoid. This is old school medicine. This is new school medicine. So both things are supposed to be what we offer as doctors, but sometimes my colleagues don't study, and they study, but they don't study ancient healing traditions, and they only study new. And new will work, but I think that if you have a couple different ways to treat people, you'll have a higher success rate. So Tony, hopefully this helps with you. Don't forget to hit the other videos that I'll put down below, and if you have persistence, I should see it. And if you other guys have persistence, you should talk to your doctors first and get some help.